Discombobulated. I feel like I should be welcoming everybody to the week of prayer and so on, but we'll do that in what 3 weeks time or something. So or 4 weeks, whatever it is. So it's a delight to be here. Our brother, as he was praying, said something about the extensive knowledge I have. I feel as I'm standing here like I know so little. One of the things you learn as you start circulating and traveling a little bit is just how little we know and how insulated our lives are, and how, for me as a unilinguist, I know one language, and as you travel, you realize how unusual that is. So many people we visit know 3 languages, 4 languages, 5 languages, 6 languages, and they're shocked that we only learn English. And I have to tell the story every time about how as a boy, we learned French, or we were supposed to learn French, but I was a little rural farm kid, and I couldn't imagine why I would need to know another language. And so I resisted all the way through public school. I was not going to learn French, and I didn't learn French, and I regret not speaking French or any other language. So, anyways, one of the first things we did, my wife and I, when I took on the role at MSC, and I'll just give a few words about that in a minute. But one of the first things we did is we realized we don't even know the countries of the world like we should. And I don't have it on the screen or anything, but there are some wonderful apps and computer games where you can quiz yourself on countries, and it country, and you have to click on it, and it grades you and times you, and you can do regions. You can start if you want small and just start with Africa and nailing down a country in Africa, and once you get those, you go to Europe and East Asia, Central Asia, all those, and it's really very, very helpful, and I think is probably one of the most beneficial things I've done in the last few years, because when I hear about a place, or a country in Africa, if I haven't been there, at least I know where it is and I can visualize. So that's a great help. So I am involved with MSC, and lots of people ask what it stands for, and I say it doesn't stand for anything. It used to stand for, back in 1940 when we started, it used to stand for Missionary Service Committee. And we are no longer a committee. We're a Canadian charity. We function with a board and everything else, just like CMML. So that doesn't really work. We don't typically, or depending where we are, talk about missionaries. We tend to talk about mission workers. Sometimes the term, depending where you are, the term missionary comes with baggage. And so we're just MSC Canada is what we are. And it's true, we are almost identical to CMML. We work very closely with CMML. I'm on a call every month praying with John Peaslin, the executive director, and we do a lot together, and it has been wonderful. The prayer handbook, you'll notice, lists all the workers either from CMML, and that is typically dependent on the assembly. That often, if there's 2 commendations, that gets complicated. We typically go with the husbands, if there's a husband in the situation, or the main commendation at least. So we have about just under 400 workers serving both overseas and in Canada. That's the one difference that we have between us and CMML. CMML is focused on overseas global work, and CWF, Christian Workers Fellowship here in the US, supports and handles donations for those that are serving itinerant and full-time workers in the US. CMML does not typically handle that. We in MSC don't have the equivalent. We support what we call 2 categories of workers. We have GMW. It's kind of like the military. You have to have acronyms. So we have GMWs. They are our global mission workers. They are those that are serving cross-culturally in some form. So even if they're serving cross-culturally in Canada with refugee ministry, or in First Nations ministry, or in the province of Quebec, we lump them in cross-cultural workers, just like if they're overseas. And then we have our CMAs, our Christian Ministry Associates, and those are those that are serving as itinerant commended workers or something, or camp workers, or in assemblies as commended workers. And so we have those two categories, about 250 overseas and about 150 in Canada. So why the province of Quebec? Does anybody know we would consider that? I mean, obviously they speak French and I don't speak French. So, but does anybody know the significance, kind of the strategic missional significance of the province of Quebec? It is the largest unreached people group in North America. So statistically, an unreached people group is less than 2% evangelical. And so the province of Quebec is about 0.8% evangelical. So a very dark place, a very Roman Catholic, but of course, over the decades, many have left that and have just become whatever, non-somethings or secular. And so it's a very hard place. And so as an organization, we do whatever we can to, we don't start ministries. That's not our role. We see our role as supporting local church-driven missions. So if there's a commended worker that is called to a ministry and there's something going on, then we do whatever we can to help on the legal, logistical side. We often explain our role. We say that when a worker goes to the field, there's two frequencies happening at the same time. There's the spiritual frequency, and that is, of course, what elders and local churches are interested in, and the Spirit of God is calling to a work and all of that. That's the spiritual aspect. But where there's money involved, and in Canada, it's the Canadian Revenue Agency, when there's a donated funds, charitable funds involved, they are interested, and they're not so much interested in the spiritual aspect like your local church elders are, but they are interested nonetheless. And so when a worker goes out, in Canada that is, they have to go out as charitable agents. Sounds very unspiritual. We have, with all of our workers going out, they sign a joint agency agreement. They're, in essence, the spiritual agents of an assembly going out, and then they're our charitable. It gets very complicated, but that's the world in which we live. And so we do the best we can to make the legal and the logistical side of things light for our workers on the field. And so that's another thing that we also do is we where ministries grow and develop and become something more than just than what is supported through a worker's personal funds. We will set up projects. And so it can be schools, it can be medical centers, hospitals, that kind of thing, and where people can donate specifically to a project, and it's handled differently. And so that's a little bit of what we do. We also have one of the programs that has become more and more significant is our risk management side of things. My predecessor, Phil Barnes, they served in Zimbabwe for about 18 years, and it was while the country of Zimbabwe was falling apart. And he recalls the feeling of being a commended worker from an assembly in Northern Ontario, a little assembly. They didn't have a clue what was going on in Zimbabwe. And so he recalls, as a couple, as him and his wife were there, feeling very alone and very isolated, and the world is falling apart around them, and so on. And so he was quite convinced when he came home from the field and got involved at MSC that part of what we needed is a program to support our workers that are in difficult places and going through difficult things. And so we have we're linked with a subscription. This is all background information, by the way, but so you know who we are and what we're doing. We are linked with an organization called Garda World, which is an organization that it's a security firm, and they claim to have 200,000 boots on the ground. That's their claim, but they know what's going on everywhere, almost literally. They just in every region, every suburb, everywhere, and so they send alerts to every kind of risk, whether it's like what's going on in the Middle East, or whether it's a health virus, or whether it's a financial crisis, or whether it's crime or gangs or environmental. So we get those, and where our workers are, it gives us an ability to communicate with them and say, this is what we're hearing. And just communicating, not to tell them you got to come home or anything like that. We don't feel that that's our role, but to support them. And so, for example, just this 2 weeks ago, Sherry and I were in Cyprus and in Egypt, and we were with our workers, Graham and Caroline Webb, that serve at the Logos School in Cyprus. And we got on a plane and came home, and less than a week later, there's a missile dropping, within 30 kilometers, I think it was, or 40 kilometers of their home. Totally unexpected on the island of Cyprus. No one would have seen that coming. But we were able to, and Phil was able to track with them. He gets the alerts while the missiles are still in the sky, kind of thing, and is able to communicate with them and say, do you have a plan? You might need to get some extra cash out. You might need to get some gas. It's good to have some extra groceries, that kind of thing. And just working, we've got a young lady that travels back and forth into Russia, and she appreciates being on WhatsApp. And just knowing that there's somebody, as she's going to the border, she says, okay, I'm 15 minutes, 10 minutes away. I'm going through. I'll let you know how it goes, and that kind of thing. Just to know that there's somebody out there supporting. So, anyways, lots of things that I could talk about. But one of the things I thought I'd start with is just this whole idea that this is 75 years that this conference is going on, and going back to 1950, 1951. How many of you were kind of around? I mean, any of you mid 70s, sort of, kind of? Nobody's going to admit it. Yeah. Well, it's interesting and fun to think about some of the life realities in that era. I was struck by some of these numbers. The average cost of a new home, $8,000. That sounds wonderful. Our home, my grandfather built it in the late 60s, and he gave me when we bought it, a file of all the original receipts, and it was 28,000 for everything, for a finished home on a 1-acre property out in the country. So the good old days. But the average income, $3,000. That's interesting. Cost of a new car, $1,500. Price of gas, 20 cents. How many remember gas 50 cents or lower? Anybody remember 50 cents? Yeah. Groceries for a family of 4. Our breakfast cost more than that this morning, didn't it? This was interesting. The global life expectancy for men in 1950, the overall was in the 40s, which was kind of shocking to me. But when I looked up what it was in North America, it was higher. And so 65. I think we've gained about 8 years right now. So women are like got a decade on us or something. But anyways, inventions. Velcro. Who could imagine life without Velcro? Credit cards, and the polio vaccine. And then this one is a significant one, and we'll circle back to this later at the end of the evening. The global birth rate in 1950 was an average of 5 children per woman, and in the U.S. it was about 3.5. So to maintain our population, we need just a little more than 2 to replace mom and dad. So to maintain or to grow a population, you need about 2.1. So do you know what the US is right now? 1.6. Yeah, and Canada is less than that, 1.4, something like that. And so we'll get to this, but that's why immigration then is the solution for governments. Bring people, if we want to increase services, we want young people working and paying taxes and all the rest. And so whether you like it or not, that's the solution to a declining population. It's either have babies or do immigration. So I guess leaders of governments have not. I mean, you've heard them try, but it's typically not going to change the trend on that. Well, here's the point, and I'm going to share this slide a number of times over the course of this weekend. We are called to reach this world, the times in which we live, not the one that used to exist or the one that may emerge, but this world as we find it today. And my thought this weekend is what I'd like to do is think in terms of what are the things when we talk about missions. And by the way, I want to focus. I want to have a narrow definition of what missions is. I've got a book in the house that I just started reading when I came. I wished I would have read it earlier because it might have enriched my presentation. But the title is called "Everything is Missions?" ? And the author is pushing back on this trendy idea that everything is missions, that everything we do locally, whether we go to the grocery store, whether we're missional. That's a trend. We're missional. We're and everything. Life is missions and everything like that. And this author and others that I'm familiar with push back on that and say if everything is missions, then we need to find a new term for what does it mean when we reach across cultural, religious, ethnic, geographic barriers to advance the work of making disciples amongst the nations. If everything is missions, then we need a new word. Well, my intent, I recognize we're all called to be evangelists and be witnesses and to do the work of evangelism, to be technically correct. But for the purposes of this missions conference, I want to be narrow in my definition and think in terms of reaching across cultural, religious, ethnic, and geographic barriers to advance the work of making disciples of all nations. And so we have a timeless mandate. And so what I'm thinking in tonight and tomorrow in each session is looking at something that's timeless, but then stepping into the current era and saying, okay, but what is the modern era of missions look like, and what is changing as it relates to the world of missions. Sometimes we use terms and we don't really know what they mean. So I thought timeless mandate sounded good, and I thought, well, what does that mean? So of course I Googled it like everybody does, and I liked it. I thought, well, this applies very well. So a timeless mandate, an enduring authoritative command or purpose that remains relevant, applicable, and essential across all generations, cultures, and situations, regardless of the passage of time. Here's a question. Where do we find the gospel first preached in our Bibles? It's a bit of a trick question, but
well, I know that Isaiah has the prophecy started in Isaiah because I know there are prophecies also goes to the book of Isaiah, right?
There is. Correct? Yeah, kind of. Here's what the Apostle Paul says. He says that the scriptures, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel. Interesting, use as that term. Preaches the gospel to Abraham beforehand, saying, "In you all of the nations of the earth shall be blessed." It's important that we start at the right place when we think about missions, when we think about this timeless mandate. Otherwise, we end up at the wrong destination. But notice what it says there: in you, in Abraham, all the nations shall be blessed. And at the heart of missions, as you know, and I'm not going to say anything new in the next couple of minutes here, nothing new. God's heart for the nations, we see it all the way through the scriptures. And one of my prayers has been for myself and would be for all of us that the Lord would work in our hearts to give us a love and a burden for the nations that aligns with His heart, a love for the nations. Notice what we have here in Genesis, and I'll read just a little more than what's on the screen. Genesis, the well-known verses that many missions conferences start with, to be quite honest, because it's one of the first times where we see God speaking so directly about the nations. And in Genesis 12 and verse 1, it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So 5 times in these verses, there's reference to blessing. I'm a simplistic kind of guy. I read these verses and these words, and I think, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a blessing? What is a blessing? And so if you look at in Strong's concordance, it would tell us that the word blessing actually comes from the root to kneel in adoration. And so obviously we're used to it in terms of our relationship to the Lord and our blessing in expressing our adoration to the Lord. But here is saying that God is saying, I'm going to bless you, Abraham, and I'm going to bless you in such a way that ultimately others are going to be blessed, and ultimately at the end here, in you all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. In other words, Abraham, I don't want you just to be a sponge, but I want you to be a conduit. I want you to be the means by which the nations of the earth, the families of the earth shall be blessed. So that's the Abrahamic covenant. And then we jump ahead to this passage in Exodus. And in Exodus 19, we have this scene at the side of Mount Sinai where God is speaking, and you'll notice what do I have here in verse 6. He says this: "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." In other words, God is reminding them, this is what I've done for you. This is not about you and your great ability. Back later, we read it's not because of the greatness of you as a people. It's because I loved you, and it's because I desired to bless you that I brought you out, and I made you my special treasure, my peculiar people, the old King James says, to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. But notice that's the backdrop. And then he says, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. What does that mean? Well, Peter helps us to understand what that means. In 1 Peter 2, he talks about the New Testament believer, and he says, you're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people. For what purpose? That you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. And so again, God is emphasizing the point. Listen, I have brought you to myself. I have brought you out of the land of Egypt. I've brought you out from slavery, and I've established you, and I will establish you as my people. But my goal is that you would be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. In other words, that other people through you would come to know me, that you would function in that as a nation in that priestly role, that others will come to know you and learn of you through me, through yours as a nation. And then Psalm 67, another well-known passage that relates to, and some would refer to Psalm 67 as the missionary psalm. Now, this one I like in particular because we spent a week praying through this psalm in this very room a number of years ago. I don't know if you remember that, and the thought there as the psalmist prays in Psalm 67 again is very similar. He's saying, Lord, we're asking you to bless us. And if we would just stop there, it'd say, well, that's kind of a selfish focus. Why are you wanting to be blessed? And of course, in their day, in their era, as they thought of blessing, it would be blessing perhaps their crops, for their flocks, their health, their families, their people. The psalmist is saying, God, be merciful to us and bless us and cause his face to shine upon us. This, Lord, would you do this for us? And if it stopped there, we would wonder, but it doesn't stop there. It goes on in verse 2, the psalmist says, that your way may be known, or so that your way may be known on earth, and your salvation, your Yeshua. We talked about that here a couple of years ago, your Yeshua among all nations. And so again, here's the heart of this psalmist in this missionary psalm. He's saying, Lord, please bless us. Why? Just so that we can absorb more blessings, so that we can be that sponge of blessing, just absorbing more and more. No, he's saying, Lord, we want to be a conduit. We want to be a means. We want to be a channel so that others, that the nations, that all the peoples would know of your salvation. And that was the heart of the psalmist as he prayed, that God's salvation, that God's Yeshua would be known by all the peoples of the earth, and that God would receive, that he would receive all of the praise, all of the glory that he is worthy of. And so the end of the psalm says in verse 5, this is Psalm 67, verse 5, let the peoples praise you, O God, let all the peoples praise you. Then the earth shall yield her increase. God, our own God, shall bless us. God shall bless us, and all the ends of the earth shall fear him. And so as we think about the missionary heart of God, if we use that terminology, and I think that's a fair term to use. I have a book on my beside my chair, and I've just scratched the surface of it. It's 750 pages, and it just intimidates me looking at it. And but it's a book, and maybe some of you have heard it on perspectives. It's been turned into a missions course, and it comes from I think the 80s or the 90s. But yeah, it sits on my. Well, I shouldn't exaggerate, but it's a pretty thick book. But the first chapter, it's a compilation of articles and messages and so on. The first chapter is written by John Stott, and the title of the chapter to start this whole book on missions is "The Living God is a Missionary God." And I think that's so important for us as we think in terms of missions and of what God is doing in missions and what the ways we're involved in missions and the stories that we're hearing. This is an outflow of the heart of God. This is his initiative. This is his work that we're partnering with him in it. He's a missionary God. I was at a mission symposium. I didn't know mission symposiums existed in the way that I do now. And I guess I could give a little bit of my background as I'm going along here. I served for, and we served for about 24 years in our local assembly in itinerant work, but in pastoral care and ministry, and worked with our elders in the marrying and the burying and the visiting and all those kinds of things up until just 3 years ago when the Lord opened the door. And I'll share more about that later this weekend. And anyways, where was I going with that? That's not in your notes, your bunny trails. But anyways, one of the things that I had to learn in all of this is that this is the heart of God that we're aligning ourselves with when we start to talk about missions and what the Lord is doing. I like what this is William MacDonald in his commentary, and I think it is in relation to Psalm 67. He said it was not God's will that Israel should be the terminal of his blessing, but a channel. There are numerous indications throughout the Old Testament that God's salvation was for the Gentiles as well for the Jews, and that Israel, as a kingdom of priests, was to serve as mediator between God and the nations. And so we are introduced to a verse. Well, I don't have it on my screen, but when we read a verse like John 3:16, it takes on a whole different meaning when you think about the Old Testament context and God's heart for the nations, and his plan from all the way back from the days of Abraham, all the way through. When you read God so loved the world, you think, wow, he really did. This is who he is. And one of the joys in the role that I have is being able to see and experience and visit some of these different places and the beauties of different cultures and languages and traditions. And as I said, we just spent 2 weeks in Cyprus and Egypt, and again, a part of the world I'd never been in, and to see what the Lord is doing, and to see the cultures, and to smell the smells, and to hear the music, and all of that. It's just, and when you start piecing that all together and realize this is all part of God's creative masterpiece, the cultures and languages and all of this, and it really is this, as you anticipate and as we envision, as we see in Revelation, this scene around heaven of worship in every language and people and tongue coming together. And so when we read that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, there's great depth of meaning to that statement. It's not just a Sunday school verse, but it really speaks to the very heart and character of God. Um, there was a German theologian back in the 30s who came up with the term, and it's become kind of a popular term, but that doesn't mean it's a bad one. Missio Dei, the mission of God. And this idea, I think it's a helpful term because it helps us realize that when we talk about missions, this is not about what CMML is doing. or this is not about what MSC is doing, or what Wycliffe or OM or any of the other organizations that are out here are doing. This is about God's heart, and this is about this timeless mandate that we have, and it aligns with who He is. And so when we come to the New Testament and we read and we hear the risen Lord Jesus saying to His disciples, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of who? Of all nations. That's important to Him. All nations. And I'm guilty of becoming so insulated and isolated in my life from all nations, and hardly it's easy to go for us in the West to go through our life not even thinking about all nations and the vast need of all nations. And we'll look at some numbers before the evening is out. This is our timeless mandate. So let's talk now about some of the changes or some of the trends, some of the trends that are shaping our world. And I want to clarify that I'm summarizing here now as we think over 75 years some of the major shifts that have taken, and I'll highlight maybe 5 or 6 of them for the purposes of tonight. None of these again are overly new or maybe surprising to you, but I think they're significant and ultimately do have an impact on missions and how missions are being done in our current era. And this is the first one, and I debated even as I was coming down here um, whether I would include this one or not. The collapse of Christendom. And the reason I debated that is because I feel like there could be a possibility in this current era, in this current presidency, feeling like that the ship has been turned, and we're no longer in danger. I'm going to speak very generally here about the West and say it ain't what it used to be. And what do we mean by Christendom? Christendom simply is a fancy way of saying it's a society, it's a country, it's a place where Christianity shapes the culture, the laws, the politics, and everyday life. And so you can see in 1950 how and where we are today, how things have changed. And this has been something again that much of Europe and North America really for a long time we've lived that way in this Christendom, this environment where our faith instructs and has an impact on culture and the legal system, the political system, and everything. And we've been the beneficiaries of that. That's why so many people want to come to this part of the world to live, because it's founded on Judeo-Christian ethics, and we're all the beneficiaries of that on your side of the border and on ours, and even the remnants of what remains in Europe. What did it look like in when Christendom was really in its prime? Um, yeah, church attendance was normal; it was expected. You think of the King and Queen of England, who are guardians of the faith, and they're the head of the Church of England, and they're the king and of the monarchy, and the two go together. They're not separated. Law is influenced by Christian morals, and so on. I remember, this isn't a picture of me. Don't worry. Uh, this should I tell you, this was an AI picture. I just, it's one of those fun little things you tinker with, and I'm like, a picture of a boy standing beside a desk singing the Canadian, anyways, and this pumped out. So I thought, how cute. So there, I remember in the mid 70s, every morning, standing beside my desk, standing at attention, singing the Canadian national anthem. But what do we do after that? We said the Lord's Prayer. And I think every student in Canada in the 70s, I don't know about here, probably the same. We all said the Lord's Prayer, didn't think a thing of it. Can I imagine doing that in Canada today? Maybe in some classes where there's teachers that are believers, but no, I mean, we're so far removed, certainly on our side of the border, from that era. And so it's interesting, and there's a lot that could be said about this, but this is a real shock for us, living in kind of a post-Christian. And yes, I know. I mean, there's wonderful athletes that are bold with their faith and so on, and prayer in the White House. All of those things are wonderful, but I don't think it takes away from the fact that this native air of the Christendom that once was, is not diminished from what it was. But again, I'm having a problem losing my oh uh, where I was going was, this has an impact on, if I can say, how we do missions. And for us in the West, it's kind of a shock because we don't really know how to live our Christian faith on the fringe, on the outside of culture, conflicted with culture, at odds with culture. And for most of us, even in Canada, though we're drifted a long ways away, as a believer, we can still meet quite openly. We can, we still have Merry Christmas and all those kinds of things. We're still quite comfortable with that. But Christians in India have never experienced that, living with their Christianity in the as part of the social political environment. And you go down the list of countries. We had this rare privilege, this unusual privilege of having our culture shaped by our Christian values. But many, the majority of the world, as you know, we're again doesn't know of this privilege. We've been used to this environment that provides a safe haven for Christians. But as Christianity, or Christendom rather, collapses, Christianity is not collapsing, by the way. But as Christendom diminishes, it impacts our lives greatly as believers. And so these are some of the things I've said. And the second point here is a positive one. One of the challenges that we from the West have always been, well, one of the charges, but also one of the challenges, is that when Western missionaries, Canadians, Americans, and when we went to the mission field, we were not simply taking Christianity, but we were taking a form of government. We were taking everything with it, and it was hard to separate what is colonialism, what is Christianity, what is the Bible, what is and so as we move into an era where we're as believers living on the fringes, just like of culture, just like everybody else, it purifies our motive a little bit. I guess is what I'm saying, and could be a positive thing. Reached places are becoming unreached, which is an interesting thing. That's why I'm not, I don't use that personally, that terminology a lot, because countries that were reached are now unreached, right? And you look at where Christianity started, the birthplace, and where it grew, and those, that you look at the map, and most of those countries now would be on our list of hard to reach places, where there may be just a small remnant of Christianity left, but mostly a post-Christian era. And so places that were reached are unreached, and places that were once unreached have thriving gospel witnesses, and we'll get to that in a minute. So we are finding that Canada is becoming a mission field, believe it or not. We were in France last summer and visiting an assembly there, and a couple came up to us and they said, "Oh, you're from Canada," and I said, "Yeah, whatever." And they said, "Oh, our daughter and son-in-law are in Canada as missionaries." I said, "Oh, really?" Sent from France to Canada to serve as missionaries. They're French speaking, from France, and so they are in Quebec, in the city of Montreal, and they're reaching Francophone Africans, Algerians, Moroccans, who have come to Canada, and wide open door in the city of Montreal to preach the gospel and to witness to its people. So it's very interesting. There's lots more to say about that. Again, this you've heard these kinds of things, but it's a significant trend that has shaped our world over the last 75 years and less. And it's this whole concept of postmodernism and this idea that there's no single universal truth, this idea of objective truth, this, that you could that applies to everyone. And this is the kind of, like, this just drives me crazy because I like to be black and white. And so this idea of, well, it might apply to you but not to me, like, that just is like fingers on a chalkboard for me. I don't, but it's the reality of the times in which we live, this questioning, can we really know what is true? And so as a result of that, you lose your moral, your spiritual moorings, and you don't know what you're standing for or what you're not. And so it becomes very difficult to live in that kind of way. And then, of course, loss of meaning, loss of hope, all of that goes with a postmodern mindset. Moral relativism, it's my choice, I can choose what to do with my body. Redefinition of marriage and sexuality, it's all part of this postmodern era. It's interesting, with technology and AI in particular. I mentioned that it's only becoming more and more difficult to know what is true. So if we're in a postmodern mindset where you can't trust anything, and then you bring technology in and it affirms the fact that you can't trust anything. So just this week, our financial director sent an email to a couple of the staff and said, "Here's an article I read about something that just happened in the last month or two." It was telling the story of a multinational firm, and there was a administrative assistant that had a meeting with some of the heads of this multinational firm on Zoom, and so had this full interaction with the head of the company and so on. And as a result of what came out in that meeting, she was asked in that meeting to transfer $25 million to a certain bank account. And I guess in that multinational firm, that was something that was done. I can't, in MSC economy, can't quite fathom that. Anyways, long story short, that meeting was all deep fake. So everybody in that meeting was not real. It was AI generated, and she was interacting like she thought they were real, and $25 million went up in smoke or went into the wrong hands. That's kind of scary. And so in a postmodern era where, can we really know what's true? How do we know what's true? How do I believe you if you're telling me something? Having this kind of technology then that just feeds that mindset. You can't trust anything. We were in Egypt, as I said, 2 weeks ago, and the one we came in from some meetings to our worker. I won't tell you his name just because it's kind of embarrassing, but he was kind of stirred up. There was a news article or a video, a news item of a thing that happened between our Canadian Prime Minister and President Trump. Of course, that matters these days. And so it was this whole thing about, of course, from the Canadian side, showing how Prime Minister Carney stood up to President Trump, and changing the course of history, blah, blah, blah. So he saved it on the phone because he wanted us to see it. So we were sitting there eating our pita sandwiches and watching this extended, 10-minute news report. We found out a day later it was all fake. It wasn't true. None of it had happened. The news report wasn't. It was AI generated. And once again, he was kind of embarrassed and learned a lesson not to just take everything at face value. But it's hard, and this will only so my talk is not actually on technology, but it's a huge factor in postmodernism. Major trust in this is before technology, major distrust in institutions, government, and churches. So again, this has a huge impact in the world of missions, and as we go out with the gospel. And so just in very quickly, people are skeptical of truth claims. Again, what's true for you may not be true for me. Personal experience elevated above everything. Christianity teaches the truth is objective. Jesus is Lord. The scriptures are authoritative. That goes against the grain of a postmodern mindset. Postmodern believes that these claims are too exclusive, intolerant, and outdated. And so our evangelism must address these issues of skepticism and pluralism and religious indifference. There's a lot there, a lot more could be said. But I don't know if I have it here or not. Yes, I do. There's also a positive side to this. And this is the positive. People crave genuine relationship. And so coming with some truth claims, the ABCs or, the 1, 2, 3s or the Roman road or those kinds of things probably are going to be met with skepticism. Not saying it's wrong. The word of God is living. It's powerful, sharper than any two-edged. The entrance of the word gives light. I'm a big fan of the word of God. But the reality is, in this day and age, authentic relationship where somebody really senses you care for them, you love them, that's going to go a long, long way to opening doors for the sake of the gospel. The shift of the global center of Christianity, you're probably, again, aware of some of these things. This is a chart that I find fascinating. In the year 1800, approximately 99% of all believers were in Europe and North America. 10%, 1% rather, in the rest of the world. 1900, you see the change. 1979, 50-50. And this, by the way, is not a negative statement about the West, though Christianity has declined some. This is a statement about what God has been doing in the rest of the world. 2020, 33%, 1/3. Just 120 years earlier, it was 99%, 1%. Now it's 1/3, 67. They're saying by 2050, it could be 15% and 85% in the rest of the world. It's remarkable what God is doing. One of the, maybe you've seen a map like this. This is tracking the center of Christianity over the history of the church. Of course, it started in Jerusalem, the center, in AD 33, and so you can see how and that the center is just essentially where there's an equal number of believers north, south, east, and west from that point. So you start in the center. And for the first 1,500 years, you see it moving north and west as the gospel goes out into Europe, to North America, and then it starts trending downward through to 1900. But then look from 1900 what had happened in that first part of that century, and again, it's a result of so many missionaries being sent to the Southern Hemisphere, to South America, to Africa, and the gospel taking root. and really exploding, multiplying, and so suddenly there was over that first number of decades a sharp decline, and then in 1970 was a historic shift to the east. It was the first time in centuries that the center, the geographic center of Christianity started shifting east. And that's again a result of some of the great things that God is doing in the eastern part of the world. And so that's the trend line that they're predicting through to 2100. And so now, as we think about new faces of the body of Christ, countries like Nigeria, Brazil, India, China. Um, yeah, I'm running out of time, so I got to be quick here. The whole church taking the whole gospel to the whole world. Throughout most of the 19th and 20th centuries, almost all of the mission activity flowed from Europe and North America to Africa, Asia, Latin America. And the reality is some of us still think that's global missions. It's often been coined the West to the rest. And so many of us think, okay, this when we're talking missions, that's what's happening. And so all of the resources, the Western churches are supplying most of the missionaries, the funding, theological training, the leadership, all of that. Um, but now it's different. Now it's very different. The very countries that were traditional mission fields are now mission forces, and so you've got South Korea that um, they're suggesting there's probably 16,000 missionaries sent out from South Korea. They're the second largest country in the world, next to the U.S., for sending missionaries to unreached people groups from South Korea. Brazil, a friend of mine is part of a large mission organization, and he was down at a missions conference, and they've got plans for, I can't remember how many, tens of thousands of missionaries sent to the unreached from Brazil. Nigeria, a huge sending force. So now you've got, as I've got here, Filipino missionaries being sent to Islamic nations, Korean missionaries being sent to Europe, Nigerian missionaries coming to North America. This is a map I use at MSC to describe. This is the way it was in 1940. This was, all the missionaries going out one direction from one spot, I guess all across Canada, but really being sent out from our location. This is a little more what it's like right now. This is not exaggerating at all to say this is the era of missions that we're in. Um, Again, I wish I could tell stories. Well, I can tell stories. That's my problem. Being in Egypt last week, part of the reason we went was to learn about what God is doing through the Egyptian church, and to hear a brother sitting there say, "We believe that Africa is our responsibility as a church in Egypt." And so they have established training centers in 10 of the North African countries, because they know he was himself a missionary in South Sudan and got removed. And he realized this is going to be happening more and more. So they have now, their organization have now started these training centers in, well, I think it's now to 15 countries, and they're all the countries you and I couldn't get into. And they're training national leaders to be church planters, and to even be a participant in their program. They have to go through this extensive, rigorous training, or I mean, all these hurdles. They have to read not that this is extensive and rigorous, but they have to read the Old Testament. They have to handwrite the New Testament out in full before they're even considered to be interviewed as an applicant for this training program. They train these missionaries in church planters in these countries. They said, we don't have to worry about cross culture. We don't have to worry about language, because they're in their culture, they're in their language. We just have to give them the tools the capacity building is the trendy term, and release them. And so here's Egyptian believers who are saying, we believe Africa is our responsibility. Thank you very much. And we're in this 6-story building, this mission center in the heart of Cairo. It was extraordinary what God is doing through that one organization. So this is not an exaggeration to say this is what missions look like. You know this, people are just moving everywhere, not just missionaries, everybody's moving, and 300 million living outside their country of birth. What's interesting is they often carry their faith with them. So that can be good, that can be bad. So you look at what's happening in Europe, the Islamification, is that a word? You know what I mean? Islamized, you know what I'm saying? It's happening, even if I can't say it. In Europe, now they opened up because their population was in decline, birth rate was in decline. And so they open up to immigration, wide open, and those that are coming in are bringing their belief system with them. But it also happens the other way, where we have, as I said earlier, believers coming to Canada, believers coming to the US. And so there's many that are coming, the strong believers out of some of the Central African countries that are coming. They're fleeing persecution, but they're coming as strong believers. We at MSC are supporting a Syrian refugee, obviously not Africa, but a Syrian refugee who came as a refugee, but she's convinced she came to Canada to be a missionary. So she has found her way to an Egyptian church just about 5 minutes from our office at MSC. She's been commended by them to reach Arab women in a faith-based community center 5 minutes the other way from our office. Interestingly, it's a community center run by the Chinese church. They've bought a whole what do you call it, a commercial center, and they've built it and turned it into this community center where all the seniors can play pickleball and all that kind of stuff. But they've got offices to help you with paperwork, they've got food bank, they've got all these kinds of things, and it's clearly all over the walls. We're here to showcase the love and light of Jesus Christ in this community. In that community center, the Chinese leadership were concerned, we are too cultural. We're just all Chinese. We want this to be for everybody. We've got this big commercial kitchen. We don't know what to do with it, but we'd love to see it used. Well, our Syrian refugee commended worker, she loves to cook. And so they connected, the Lord brought them together. They said, could you do something for Arab women in using this kitchen? So she runs a friendship kitchen, has Bible studies with Arab women, runs children's clubs out of it. And so again, here's the world we live in. We've got a Syrian refugee commended by an Egyptian church to serve at a Chinese community center reaching Arab women. And that's all within 5 minutes of our office at MSC. That is the nature of this modern age of missions, urbanization. Missions is part of the future is going to involve reaching cities that are religiously pluralistic and diverse. I think for sake of time, I'm going to pause, and I'll come back to that tomorrow. The question, I guess, as we just wrap up is where's our heart? What's our heart condition as we think of the nations and as we think of what God is doing in God's heart for the nations? Do we even think about the nations? Do we care about the nations? And it would be good for us. And I trust these days will help us just to think in terms of this, but to be thinking in terms of what is God doing and what is my responsibility with this timeless mandate. God loves the nations, wants us to go and make disciples of all the nations. And so may we be encouraged to do just that. So I'll hand it off.
like to reassure everyone that Randy is not AI generated. I shook his hand earlier. He's warm. He's a real person. And we thank you for your message tonight. Sometimes, sometimes the Lord has a way of speaking through people where they share something that's so true in a simple way that's easy to remember. And I really appreciate that reminder that the Lord sends the whole church to share the whole gospel to the whole world, all of us, right? And that's a good truth to hold on to. And I was really encouraged to hear some of the updates of the things that are going on all over the world. I did also remember that we forgot to sing our theme song. So, Malcolm, if you don't mind, we forgot to sing a theme song. I was supposed to do it before the theme song. We can't leave without hearing the theme song, right?
Oh, okay. Well, it's in our bulletin there, so we can just sing that together. We're saved to tell others. We're
Saved to tell others of the land of Galilee. Saved to live daily for the Christ of Calvary. Saved to invite you to His salvation free. We're saved by the blood for all eternity. All right, before we're gonna have Alexis and Herman come to play a closing song, and then afterwards our brother Christian Akeley will close us out in prayer. I wanted to go over the order of events for tomorrow. So we're going to be coming back here 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll be having